everyone, it's Lil D from LilDevet.com and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm bringing to you part 2 of my work bullet journal setup. In part 2, I'll be sharing with you my process for transitioning to a new work bullet journal, as well as sharing my top 10 layouts that I feel would be helpful to have in a work bullet journal, particularly if you manage multiple projects. So if you'd like to learn more, please keep watching. In part 1 of my work bullet journal update, I shared with you my current setup, which is this 600-page Mikhail Rius graph journal kept in a Lahit cover. It's an A5 size. If you're interested in seeing what that looks like, I'll make sure to link it up above. This is my brainstorming journal where I try to write down my thoughts on how I'd like to set up a particular planner, writing down notes on what I'd like to track, and then ultimately figuring out how to do my setup for the upcoming year. So I mentioned this in my last planner video, which was the primary planner setup one. And the reason I have it here is because I wanted to share, going into 2017, I was taking down notes on how I thought I'd like to use my work bullet journal, things that I wanted to make sure I kept track of, layouts that I was thinking of using, and then ultimately I set this up. So now that I'm at, I've been using this since November of 2016 and it's currently February of 2018, I'm trying to analyze how this was used and if there's any adjustments I should make once I finish this one up. I have about 95 pages left. The one thing I would like to do is to perhaps use a smaller size notebook. As you can see, this is a very thick book, and while it fits in here, it's a little bit sometimes unwieldy when you're trying to flip through it. So I do take a lot of meeting notes, and I was thinking of breaking that out into a separate notebook and then keeping my primary yearly, monthly, and weekly layouts in a separate bullet journal. So what I've done is I've taken a look at the index and I've tried to analyze how many pages were dedicated to what purpose. So as it stands, currently, I've used about 134 pages for meeting minutes, 74 for notes. My layouts took up about 253 pages. I have monthly index logs, which I use, and then I ended up using about 5 pages for index alone. So keeping in mind that this was used from November 2016 through February of 2018, that means that I'll actually use a little bit less. So my plans for 2018 when I finish this journal is I'd like to split it up into perhaps 2 books. And what I'm currently thinking of doing is using this Lloydstrom 1917 hardcover journal, which is a lot thinner. This one has about 249 pages. So what I was estimating was that if I set up a year on 2 pages, I have a month on 2 pages for 12 months, so that's about 24 pages, and my week pages have been averaging out along the lines of 3 or 4 pages. For 52 weeks, that's about 208 pages. So roughly, I would end up using about 232 pages. And if I add on my monthly indexes, which I'll explain in a little bit, that's an additional 12 pages, one for every month. So I'll end up using 244 of a 249-page book. So this, I think, would be a great option just for my layouts, to have it all contained in one book for an entire year. And as you can see, it's a lot thinner. If I compare it to my current work bullet journal, that would be a lot thinner. So what that would end up leaving me with is, where am I going to capture meeting notes and reference information? So what I was thinking of doing is, when you capture that information, it's helpful at the time, but frankly, once, I really don't refer back to meeting minutes from 3 months ago or 6 months ago. So it's okay if I capture it in a book and then eventually I take it out and start a new one. So my favorite choice right now is to perhaps consider these Moleskine Cahiers. They come in packs of 3. They're pretty inexpensive, and they also come in different formats. So they have grid, they have lined, and they also have blank pages. So I can use either the lined or the grid, and this coupled with my Leuchtturm, as you can see, would make a much thinner setup. So this is what I'm thinking of doing once I finish using up the remaining 95 pages that are left in my work bullet journal. So that's my plans and that's my process for figuring out how I'm going to transition into a new book. Now, as I promised you, there were some layouts that I found were very helpful for me over the past year, which I want to make sure I include in my new work bullet journal. So I'll go through those right now. So the first I've already mentioned a couple of times, which is the monthly index logs. And what that is at the end of the month, it's almost like some folks like to talk about doing a end of week review. Well, I like to do an end of month review. And what I do is I just create a 1-page summary. Anytime that on a particular day something important happened, like for example, something was approved or we reached a certain milestone, or I don't know, something significant that I would need to remember, I would just write it down in a log. Now, in an A5 book, I did do this for, November 2016 through the entire length of 2017, and it's extremely helpful. It's easier to go through one page where I have summarized everything important that happened within that month than it is to try to thumb through a 600-page book and try to find that one note that I know is in there somewhere. So that's what my monthly index logs are for. I also have a blog post that explains it in more detail. If you're interested in that, I'll make sure to also link that in the description box below. Next layout that I feel is very helpful is to have a page for goals and accomplishments. So going into the year, generally you would have some sort of goal, whether it's a career goal or a professional development goal or something that you want to strive for. Maybe you want to get a certification or a license. So whatever those goals are, it's helpful to have those in your work bullet journal so you can keep them front and center and you can stay focused to make sure that you're constantly on track to achieve them. Along with that, it's also helpful throughout the year that whenever you have a significant accomplishment, you're recording those as well. Now, having your goals and accomplishments layout coupled with your monthly index log, what I have found is that it's extremely helpful at the end of the year when my supervisor has to do my performance appraisal. Many folks have to do this in their line of work, and as much as we'd like to think that our supervisors are going to remember what we did throughout the year, usually they'll ask us to write something up just to kind of remind them. And it's helpful, that's the time for you to basically pat yourself in the back and say, look, here's everything that I did that brought value to the company. So I find that having my monthly index logs and my goals and accomplishment page is extremely helpful in helping me put together that report so that I can submit it for my performance appraisals and I make sure not to forget a single thing. The third layout that I find extremely helpful is the yearly training one. In a lot of jobs, you may have training requirements. In my particular job, I have to complete 40 hours worth of training. So what I do is I keep a log of training I'd like to take. And then when I complete it, I make sure to make a note of that. And if anything comes up throughout the year and someone recommends a class or anything like that, I make sure to jot that down as well. And that's also helpful sometimes to include as part of your performance appraisal. Layout number 4 is the pending list. I've talked about this in many of my planners. Sometimes you might delegate out something to someone, or you performed a particular step and now that task has to go through a workflow and now you're waiting on someone else to get back to you. So, you want to make sure that those things don't fall through the cracks. So keeping a pending list whenever someone owes you something or you're waiting on something, putting it down on that list, it's extremely helpful so that way you don't forget and you have an eye out, to make sure that comes back to you. Layout number 5 is a communications log. Many times through our work, we deal with specific people. I have a business owner that I deal with for my software projects. So I talk to her regularly. I have my supervisor, my project manager. So sometimes, you may not talk to them often, but you want to make sure you remember that there's something you need to talk to them about. So whenever something pops into your head, you want to make sure you jot it down on that communications log. What I do is I create one for every person that I deal with on a regular basis. So that way, when I'm on the phone with them or I'm in their office, I can just turn to that one page and I can just go down through my list and make sure that I don't forget anything. So a communications log is extremely helpful. Next up is an organization or department reference page. In a lot of larger companies, sometimes, things may change. There might be a change in leadership. There might be a change in organizational structure, or perhaps something more significant like legislation that impacts your line of work. Whatever it is, you may want to keep track of it, particularly if there's a high turnover or if there's a lot of changes going on. So I find it helpful to keep it all on one page and just writing it down. And then whenever I need to remember, oh, wait a second, is that person still around, or who's the new CIO or whatever it is, I can just turn to that one page and find the information that I need. Layout number 7 is doing something very similar, but this time for a project or a process. So I'm in software development, so I have to keep an eye on the software development life cycle. And based on the phase, I might engage different people, or I might have to work on different documentation. So just having a layout dedicated to that so that I know based on where I am in the process, what I need to do, or what requires approvals, or if there's a specific workflow that I need to follow. Whatever it is, having that all on one page, I can easily turn to that and I always know what's going on. And if something changes, I can make a note of it so that way, again, when I turn to that page, I have all that information available to me. Layout number 8 is a master task list. So sometimes, especially with a bullet journal, you don't have predefined layouts. If you've seen my past videos, I prepare a weekly task list and then I have my dailies. So I really don't have a way of putting something down for next week. So what I do is I keep a master task list. If something pops up and I'm not quite sure when or where I'm going to get to it, I throw it into my master task list. So that way, at least I don't forget. And then later on, I can take a look at it and make sure that I put it down either on the correct month or the correct week or when the day comes up. But at least it doesn't get lost. And then because it can involve any number of projects that I'm currently working on, I will color code them because that's my method of keeping track of multiple projects. If there's a due date that's assigned, I'll make sure to make a note of that. And any other relevant information, like if I need to refer to an email, I make sure to write down the date and time. Anything that would be helpful so that when I do need to focus on that particular task, I have everything that I need and I can put it down on the week or the day that I need to work on it. Layout number 9 is a layout dedicated to major project decisions or changes or milestones. So for those of you that might be working on long-term projects, sometimes you start off heading in a particular direction and then something significant happens. There's a change in course. I had a particular project that we were working on developing an application in a certain way, and then the stakeholders made a major decision that required us to completely turn the ship and go in a different direction. So making a note of when those things happened, or perhaps there's some something extra that was added to the scope of the project, having that all in a list, so that if someone gets selective amnesia, you can say, oh no, this is we remember we discussed this on this particular day and we decided to go in a different direction. At least you have that information at your fingertips. And then lastly is a layout dedicated to anything that you need to know either how to do or have the instructions to do. So this could cover a number of things. If you tend to travel a lot and there's certain, forms you need to fill out, there's deadlines or lead time, you have to submit it to certain people for approval, expense reports, something dealing with equipment. Every time something happens and you get a new computer, you have to go through these steps to configure it just right. It could be any number of things. Maybe it's perhaps setting up your voicemail system or requesting vacation. Usually there's those things that we do repetitively, but not quite often. Maybe you do it once or twice a year, so you tend to forget. So I'll have a layout, just dedicated to that with those instructions. So then at least I know and I say, oh, this just came up and I remember I did this once before. Let me find out and look for the instructions on how to do that. So those are what I'm considering my top 10 layouts that I need to make sure are in my new work bullet journal. I've analyzed how I've used my existing work bullet journal to see, how I've used it, how I can improve upon it. And then I've made my choice on, once I'm done with this book, I have about 95 pages left, what I'm going to migrate to, what specific information I'm going to put in my new booklet, and how I'm going to split it up. And perhaps, like I said, I'm going to use some additional booklets to capture meeting notes, because that's something that I don't necessarily need to refer to on a daily basis. So it's okay that, I can cycle through those books pretty quickly. So I hope you found this video helpful. If so, please give it a thumbs up. And if you have any other questions or topic requests, just leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, as well as check out my blog at littledevette.com for more information. Thanks again for watching. Until next time, bye.